with David Meckie on WZZR, broadcasting from Australia for Revolution Radio on, you guessed it, www.revolution.radio, where it's more than just radios. To jump into the chat room if you can. This is show number 354. Pause for Meckie. No Meckie. 450 and 300, he would have said. It's on air, online, and on your smart device. So grab an app to listen anywhere, wherever you are, or you can listen at home on a Grace tabletop digital radio. If you missed it, and it's talking about Solaris's show, if you missed Solaris's awesome show, you did miss out. She had John Storm on, and they're talking UFOs and MK Ultra, etc. Tons of stuff jam-packed into that. 2 hours, I'll give you that. But you don't have to have missed it. What you can do instead is just subscribe to the archives. That's what I do. If you're time poor or you need to dedicate some time to some things, and listening to the radio isn't one of those, you can actually get them as podcast for yourself. Just $5.95 subscription to the archives, and you can download them in MP3 format, listen to them on Spotify, whatever you want to do. Afterwards, if you didn't know, Spotify can play local files, or you can just save them to your favorite device and play them when you want. Think about that. Think about the convenience of being able to listen to the radio when you want to. I know it's 24/7. I know there's, the host around the clock, but you're able to listen to the show you want when you want. Now, Meckie and I, because we live in Australia, there is a tradition. Shouldn't say tradition. There's a well-respected phrase that we can put in. This is what we do. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, and where I live, it's the Dark and Jung people, and where Meckie lives, it's the Guruk people. And we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and future. And I also want to remind you that not only is this land, where we are, in Australia, 240,000 generations of stories told and passed down from each generation, but it's where you live too. You know there was a pre-flood people, right? You must know that. There was a pre-flood existence. And there was a catastrophe around about 12 and a half, between 12 and 13,000 years BC, about 12,500 BC, where Greenland had a massive impact, and there was also a huge impact in the Indian Ocean. That's to the left of Australia, between Australia and Africa, whereby it is now thought that this was the end of all of the megafauna. It got too cold for the megafauna, and there wasn't enough plant source foods, and so the predators, the predation ceased, and we lost the megafauna. And it's all the huge creatures, if you don't know what I mean. So there were huge creatures, bears twice as big as the ones today. There was a giant sloth that looked like a cow, as big as a cow. I mean, crazy, right? In Australia, we had our own megafauna. I was talking about the creatures in the North American continent before, and we had our giant kangaroos, and we had a giant thing that was in a vegetable eater, bigger than a cow, like twice, maybe 3 times the size of a cow. Sort of like I don't know. Oh, my poor brain is trying to think of the creature. Anyway, not a rhinoceros, right? Not horned creature, but, placid, thought to be placid. We don't know. So there was a period in time that ended around about 12,500 years ago, and the crater in Greenland and the crater on the bottom of the ocean The Greenland crater is about 15 miles across, and the one in the bottom of the ocean was 29 miles across. Just to give it some scale. And that scale is, let's just put this, chronically large. Chronically large impacts. Those impacts, one of those impacts would be significant enough to restart a rather fast cooling process. If, for instance, the sun, and I've been watching a few video clips on this right now, and if for instance the sun put out any gamma rays, that side of the Earth would be cooked. If the sun cooled down a little bit, or maybe went dark for a while, that would cause a massive cooling event. And there was something that really weird that happened around about that time, about 12,500 years ago, where most of the creatures on the planet died off. Maybe we ate them all. Maybe we were so desperate for food that we ate them all. Well, otherwise we wouldn't really have eaten them. Or they were able to, we still ate them, and maybe they were able to outbreed our consumption of them, and therefore they were still alive. We can't be the cause of everything, right? And that's what I'm sticking to. I'm not suggesting that we ate them into extinction. That was one of the thoughts. But then you've got the one that Meki loves, and I love this too, and that was the snap freezing of the woolly mammoths. Now, the woolly mammoths, you would imagine, they're woolly and they'd be able to sustain themselves in cold climate. Yeah, they're sort of hot climate creatures to start with, without the wool, but to be able to cope in that cold region because of their large ears and all the heat loss that they'd have to, keep that heat in. One of the things that's been put forward is, that maybe they were, more Arctic dwelling creatures. Well, I'd probably say not say Arctic, because what they were eating was buttercups at the time when they were snap frozen. And I mean, snap frozen, they didn't even get to swallow what was in their mouth, right? That's because we've been able to find those unchewed or just partially chewed things. Now, if the Greenland impact of 15-mile wide crater occurred, that's more than 100,000 times bigger than the Hiroshima explosion. Probably put a shockwave across the planet, and it's likely that did the trick. Likely. Unless you were there, unless you can give me a time machine and send us back so that we film it on our mobiles, because no one believes it unless you filmed it these days. And even if you film it, you can Photoshop the dickens out of it. If, say, 100 people were all, I don't know, whatever class of people you would believe wouldn't lie, would be sent back in time to witness it, film it, stream it live on YouTube somehow from back in time, and then unedited, and then be able to say unequivocally, this is what we saw, this is what happened, it was a shock wave. We weren't affected because we're in some kind of stasis field. I make it up. If that's what it's going to take to get the scientific community over the line on this thing, then good luck with that. You see, because there's all these things, right? All of these things that occurred around about 12,000 years ago. That's right, BC. 12,000 BC. 12.5 to 13,000 BC. We can't be exact on the year. There was some crazy melting at the poles. There was some crazy freezing at the poles around about the same time. There was Göbekli Tepe, Permapunku. A number of these megalithic structures were all there. And suddenly, there was a down tools event. All the humans, gone, and suffered some hideous amnesia. We can't remember how to do these things anymore. And we never did them again, by the way. We never built to the extent and accuracy of those people from that time. And I argue, personally, my belief is, and I know that Meki does share my belief on this, but I'm not speaking for him in this instance because he's not here to defend himself. And that is that the Egyptians inherited the pyramids, they inherited them, that's my belief, and that they were there long before the Egyptians got there, and then they had all their pharaohs and did all their stuff and just claimed ownership after a while. And stories spread that they're Egyptian pyramids. Well, no, they're in Egypt, but I still call them on the construction because there's something like 50 million. I forget what we estimated. It's maybe 100 million blocks of stone that had to be transported within a pharaoh's life, and despite there not being any hieroglyphs or soot or... And this is the good one. This is the one that I think you'll like. No Egyptian glyphs at all mention the pyramids. None are pictured. None are mentioned. There's no reference in any of the hieroglyphs from the Egyptians that the pyramids were constructed by them or anything. They don't mention it. So, they talk about all the other things, their whole lives, everybody else's lives, the pharaoh's lives. They picture ceremonies, and there is not one mention of the pyramids. You have to say that that's a little unusual. To me, just makes sense. That it wasn't them then, yeah? Because, I honestly, you would think that they would be big upping themselves and saying, yeah, we built those. How awesome is it, right? Look at this. We're the Egyptians. We can do anything. Look at these things we built. Maybe they did that bit anyway, but it was just never documented. And maybe it was never documented because they didn't actually build them. They claimed the ownership of them. And if you're Egyptian and you grew up in Egypt, don't hate me. You proved me wrong. Show me the hieroglyph where it shows them building their pyramids. Show them a hieroglyph that shows the reference to them as they've been constructed, because there isn't any. And there are massive stone structures around the world which predate human civilization from 4,000 BC, I believe, was when we were supposed to have stopped just wandering around on a planet for no reason. And none of this stuff that occurred previously is supposed to have been able to occur. And so everyone in that lockstep kind of way that they do, and they don't approve anything that's outside of this. And one of those things that they do approve is, everything that we built then has to be from 4,000 BC, right? When it couldn't be. And it appears much, much older than that. And so we've only just discovered Göbekli Tepe recently, right? Not in the last 100 years. And that's put the onion in the ointment. That's a Grandpa Simpson quote. And it's really ruined it for those people with, this tenure, and they've got entire careers based on their opinion or research, which led to an opinion. Because in the end, it's an opinion. And unless you've got the full picture and you were there, then they're just some things you strung together. And just like us, like Becky and I, when you look at all the evidence out there, this is the big gap. I mean, it's a huge gap. Why isn't there any hieroglyphs inside them? Well, no one can get inside them when the Egyptians were living, right, with all the pharaoh stuff. And so why didn't they document anything like they did everywhere else in all the tombs? My goodness, they're innate with, and there's stuff everywhere. Why wasn't there any of that in there? Because there wasn't, right? Because they didn't build them. So what about all the other mega structures around the world? All about, in South America, there is some crazy sized stones that look like they might have been putty or even molten or liquid, and they poured them. They're so accurate. And Meg and I talked about this for a long, long time. And if they were around pre, 12,500 BC, then we could do a whole bunch of stuff that we haven't relearned how to do yet. Knowing that the Romans created concrete, right, from cement. They discovered that and were able to. The Colosseum is pretty much cement. And I think it's great. And if there was right now, oh, that's right. The best thing is, where is all the other evidence in 12,500, we'll say 14,000 years ago? So where is all this evidence? Well, there's only stone left behind, pretty much. And if you were to look at, say, what's that big dam? Hoover Dam, right? So Hoover Dam in the US would take about 3,000 years and it would be gone with no evidence it was even there, except for some drill marks in the rocks, apparently. All the high-rise buildings that we have all around the world, if there was a glaciation, like a snowball earth kind of effect, they would all be ground off and pushed into the ocean. They'd be pulp. Take a number of years to get a glacier build up. Once a glacier started, it would first want to move around them until it got tall enough. If it was 2 miles high, those buildings aren't going to hold on that well. And that's going to grind them off at ground level, and there's not going to be any proof, and then another 1,000 years of dirt build up. Thinking about this, I just want to say, dirt builds up so quick where it can, where it rains and there's vegetation growing on it, that it doesn't take that. So even 50 years after planes had crashed into the ground from World War II, they had to be dug up and out, and only a wingtip or a propeller blade stuck up. And that's like in England, where the plane just doesn't sit there like it's brand new, sitting on top of the ground. It gets so slowly consumed by the ever great creation of dirt and the breaking down of carbon through plants, and it ends up getting buried. I swear, if you lay down in my chook run, you would be completely buried and never seen again. Besides, they'd probably eat you. But I know that I've just been, getting a rake and trying to clean it up. And there is so much that, they scrape the dirt and it covers over something, then it rains and it sort of goes hard and solid. And they just keep doing that until there's absolutely nothing growing in there. They eat everything. Anyway, so my main point with that whole thing was generated from a number of discussions that I had today. I was at a family Christmas do, and it's always great to see the family. And since Becky and I have been talking about Christmas, the biggest thing that, if we didn't have Christmas, I think we'd still invent it. I still think we would invent a number of things to replace the things we didn't have. So we wouldn't have like Hatred Day or anything, as has been put forward by a number of people that I've spoken with. But we'd probably have, a family get together. We don't have Thanksgiving here in Australia, so we'd be looking for something very similar to that, getting the family together, which in the US seems like just a warm run, a trial, if you will, of Christmas. So, but we would create one. We'd create something, at least something, to get the family together. And in the Southern Hemisphere, we just get barbecues. We'd have a barbecue. It's far too hot to bake a turkey in the house. But in a cold climate, you'd really want that warmth from the fire and have such a tremendous feast afterwards. You probably, in the origins we spoke about in the last 8 shows, we were talking about there being a reason for celebrating the winter solstice, and arresting that boredom and that closed-in state that you'd probably be facing in the olden days, where you might be snowed in and the only thing you've got access to is your fire and your firewood, and you're probably getting hungry, you want to celebrate something, and you probably get people together to do that. And the first thing you'd be celebrating after being closed in for so long is the ability to escape from it. And that would be the winter solstice. From here on, every day is going to get longer, thank goodness. Otherwise, if it doesn't, I'm moving to a warmer climate. And this is the thing. So we had a Christmas. So we had a Christmas family Christmas thing, and it was really good. And I was asked a number of questions, and it happens when Meki and I get together, and there's anyone at all, and if they know our background, they'll ask, what's the one conspiracy you can tell us about? Like we know heaps of them, so just name one and we'll tell you what we think about it. And we do that, and it's rather entertaining for those listening, and it ends up like a television show. And when they're done, maybe hopefully in their drive home, they might discuss that and not claim that we're crazy people, or maybe just for the moment entertain the idea that what we're telling them is true, or maybe they start their own research into it. Oh, maybe those guys have something to this, yeah. So one of the things that I was asked was interesting. It was around aliens. So the question was first asked around aliens. So given that aliens are more than likely in existence in the entire universe, there's got to be some, possibly the Drake equation leads us to about 10,000 civilizations more advanced than us. That's pretty cool. Now, if there's all of these aliens out there, then what about us? And I said, well, it's more than likely, according to the Sumerian text, that the Anunnaki came down here and we're doing really well. Yeah, they were doing their thing. They were mining their gold. They were doing what they needed to do, and we were pretty useless at that point. And their helpers, the Igigi, set out to protest against the amount of work that they were being asked to do. And this is what I said at the party. And by that, the only way the Anunnaki could silence their complaint was to create another race of beings on Earth to do the Igigi's hard labor. And they created us. Well, the black-headed people, apparently, and those people were the sons of the Igigi, not sons of the Anunnaki. And they were immortal because they didn't have to, they could just keep working forever. And they started getting a bit naughty, apparently. And there was a directive to wipe this project away and start again. And there was some people, let's call them fallen angels, and they decided to take some of the people away, save as many as they could. And they saved some, but the promise was that none of those people they saved were going to return to Earth themselves, but in fact they would have offspring, or there'd be another race created, and that was humans, the humans we are today, although they'd be age limited. They would not be any longer would they be immortal. They'd be set to 120 years of age as the maximum age they can reach. Great. So that's done, and we're thriving. Okay, so from that statement, I was asked another question, and that would be, well, if all of these aliens exist and they created us, and given that the Bible says that God created us, would there still be room for God if it turned out that it was just the aliens and not a God in the God sense, that it was just aliens that made us? And I said, I'm not critical of people who believe in God. I don't have any problem at all with even whatever God you like. It doesn't matter in the end. In the end, it doesn't matter. So if aliens exist, great. If aliens in fact indeed created us rather than it being God, then do we worship the aliens? And I said, I think we already are, in a way, because I think that they've transposed the word aliens for God, and that's just the words we used for them, right? Rather than saying, well, they were aliens and they came down, and we're still going to hold them in high regard. Thank you very much for creating us, oh ye creator. But what I think is the reason for the question was not one of panic, but a really clever question on theology. And how does that fit in if aliens exist? And I think it does. I'm not one to complain. I think that even Albert Einstein was talking about the mind of God, where if you were to keep zooming out of all of the galaxies into their galaxy strings, and then even further out so that you're looking at what looks almost like skin tissue. It looks like a membrane. It looks like it could be alive. Just the scale is way beyond our comprehension. It's like us living on even worse than us living on an atom. It's crazy in comparison. I think there's still room. I think there's room for God. Not that I need to worship. And I said one thing that Lawrence Gardner said, and he said that worship came from the words workship, where we worked for the gods. Now, working for the gods, if you replace gods for those creators of ours, which were the Anunnaki, then we worked for the Anunnaki, and that makes total sense to me. So, is there still a supreme being above the aliens? Quite possibly. I have no doubt. Now, imagine, I have no doubt that there's room for a god or gods or whoever you want. No complaint from me. And then I put the point out. Could you imagine, though? Just imagine if this was a virtual environment. That all of those discussions and everything that was had, that I just had with you about the Anunnaki creating humans. Imagine if that was only done in a virtual world. So then someone had to create the virtual environment, And then, is there really a God, or is there still a creator? There probably still is. There'd have to be a creator if it was a virtual environment. So this is how conversations go with me, and this one that I've just had with you is the same as the one that I had with one of my relatives, party guest. Awesome. It was a really clever conversation. Thank you very much for having that with me. If you do happen to listen to this and you've attended that party and you were the one I spoke to, send me a line, because it got me thinking. And not only the question, were you after your answers, but it gave me new insight, another perspective, which is something that I try to avoid confirmation bias at all costs, because that's the most dangerous thing that can lead you into the wrong direction, maybe down a cul-de-sac. So I just wanted to let you know that's where I'm at. Oh dear listeners, thank you very much for hearing that. One of the things that came up this week, I want to bring this up. And if you want more detail, please jump into the chat room. If you'd like me to continue talking about down that path with religion and aliens. Oh dear. How did I lose my internet connection? I think I'm back again. Yep, it says I'm back again. So I don't know why, but my internet seems to have dropped off. If you would like for me to continue to talk about the same topic, just bring it up in the chat room. Otherwise, I'd care to right now move on to climate change, another controversial topic. The only reason it's controversial is because not everyone agrees on it. Don't worry about the oops, up one. All right. The climate is changing. It's still changing. And in our historical records of the human race monitoring the climate, it's changing. Going back in ice cores, back before we even knew there was such thing as a word climate, we can see that climate changed. Looking back in captured gases, through those we can see that the atmosphere changed. Looking back in time, we can see that the plant life must have been massive to support the massive creatures that were here, and therefore it was warmer, and it has a higher state of being warmer than it currently is, but let's not want it to go any hotter than now. Honestly, right, if it goes any hotter, we'll see people dying in the summer of just heat. And if it goes over 55 degrees, I think we're all stuffed, to be honest. So remember, your ultimate operating temperature of your air conditioning system can't seem to cope if it goes over a certain temperature. It just becomes useless. It can no longer achieve what it needs to achieve. It can't put any more heat out into an environment that's already hotter than it's trying to put out. So it requires a temperature range, an operating temperature range of X, and from X to Y, and if that is exceeded, then it becomes inoperable. Therefore, you end up feeling the heat or the cold, and you're really going to have a hard time. All right, so I came up with something the other day to do with climate change, and the middle of Australia is absolutely baking like it's never baked before. Not last year or the year before or any other years that we can see in historical records from our current civilization's recording of records has it ever baked this hot. And we've seen new colours being added to the colour spectrum that determine, or they are a colour representing a temperature range, and they've added new colours to it to extend that range. And we're looking at some of the most severe temperatures that have ever been recorded in Australia, and certainly the last 200 years. So it's getting hotter. But what I came up with, and I hope you're interested in this because it's really got my thinking juices going, and that is, if everyone's talking about carbon emissions and the parts per million in the atmosphere and the blanket effect that it has when the sun's energy is shone through it, that it captures this heat and makes it hotter. Show me the evidence. Show me the recorded information where we captured the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere in the places that it got really hot, compared with those neighboring places where it didn't on the same day. Show me those. Show me those in the atmosphere. Show me those at different altitudes. Show me that information to prove to me that it's carbon in the atmosphere causing it to get hotter. I know the amount of joules on the ground has increased. You can't have energy come from nowhere. You can't just create thin air energy, with current physics. I know I'm excluding all of those machines that people say are infinity machines that can create energy out of nothing. Go on. Happy for you to... you should be a billionaire by now, right? Or dead. Because the billionaires would have, in the oil industry, would have already bought your invention and bought you out and paid you out, and you'd be silenced, and then they'd just shelve it. Or if you went to the military immediately and didn't tell anyone else except for the military, maybe you'd still be dead. Anyway, we'll see how that goes for you. But this is my point really is that at the moment I'm leaning towards the sun's output as being the primary cause of the increasing heat, where carbon is a factor. I'm not going to discount its ability to be a factor. I just don't know that I prefer to see the figures and then have someone try to argue why it didn't affect all the areas at the same time with the same density of carbon. That's my point. Because that's where I think that argument falls flat. Is that there is no evidence showing the carbon in the atmosphere, parts per million, where that's heating that section of air up because of the parts per million of carbon. We're told that it's happening, but there isn't any proof that it's happening. And then show me why, and try to explain why it didn't heat up 2 columns of air the same temperature if they're same parts per million. Because that's your argument, is that it's carbon causing it. I've stayed away from the cause as long as I could possibly stay away from the cause of it. Because I don't think the cause is even a discussion, even though I'm talking about it right now. You'll see the irony. But for me, it is just getting hotter. Shut up. It's getting hotter. And I don't care who you are. And if you're one of those people who think we're going to go into an ice age like tomorrow, yeah, okay, good luck. Well, why don't you come on this channel, why don't you come on this station and tell everybody that you think it's going to go into an ice age unequivocally, and set a date, and then we'll follow it up with you after that date and see how you go using your public name, your real name, right? Because I don't think you will. I think you'll put videos out there on the internet and think you're proving it to everyone, but I can't see it. I honestly can't see it. Anyway, and this is the problem. So convince me otherwise that it's not the sun's energy causing the problem on Earth right now, because the only two things that can do it is the thinning of the atmosphere, where the high energy particles are hitting the Earth now where they never used to. Therefore, the amount of joules on the Earth's surface is increasing, because you can't make more joules out of the same emission if it's getting blocked by carbon. It's getting blocked by carbon. The Earth's surface shouldn't be hotter. It should be colder. Should be colder. So, look, good luck. Teach me something that I didn't know. 15 minutes before top of the hour. This is Sunday. It's 6:44 p.m. on a Sunday here. And I'd like to say hello to all those people who listen to the station. Thank you very much. We actually have a website too, by the way, and we also have an application, but we might be killing the application. It costs $500 a year to run this app, and I just don't think I can keep running with the app. It's just too much, and so far we're going into the 8th year, I think, and that's that's a lot of money. I spent those $4 grand on it. So whatever it is. So next, there's 62 dead so far reported from a tsunami in Indonesia after the Krakatoa eruption. So this is today. So if you don't know, Google it. You'll see. You've probably already seen it in your social media feeds. There's people talking about it. There's some media. And tsunamis are pretty chronic. That's one of those things where if you're standing on the beach and all the water goes out, you run to the highest point. That's what you do. That's your automated alert, is that if you can see the ocean go out, you go high, because it's going to come back. It's going to come back faster than you can possibly imagine, and it's going to go out relative to the amount that... it's going to come back relative to the amount it went out, because that going out is the water that's needed to feed the new surface height of the ocean as that first wave comes in, and a second wave and a third. So do heed those messages from the ancient peoples, and specifically around Hawaii is where I learnt what tsunami meant and what to look for, because you only get one shot. That one shot you get will mean that your family can survive the next one. If you don't survive, good luck with that. It's pretty tough. And I've seen, it sickens me to see people just wander down and, let's have a look at these exposed rocks. It sickens me. It's very, very difficult to watch. What I also noticed when the Japan tsunami occurred was people weren't listening to the radio broadcast. They were listening to their own music in their vehicles. Therefore, they weren't hearing the nation's broadcast warning system, and they weren't being informed. There was so many lives lost in Japan because people weren't being informed, because they chose not to. And they chose to have a personal experience with their music selection, and not one that's overrideable. You see people in tiny little cars that look like cars you'd get buried in. They look like a coffin on wheels. They wouldn't even need to crush it. It would be so small you could just dig a normal coffin hole and drop the person in the car, already dead, with their car around them still, into the hole and still cover it up. Oh, it's awful. Right, so these people, you see them just haplessly driving into tsunami, raging waters or upcoming surges of water from the rivers, etc. So, and that's one of the things that they would have seen with the Greenland impact. 15-mile wide crater, insane large amount of vaporized water, a mile thick, or probably 12,000 BC, probably 2 miles thick or something. It just ate through that much. That would have been the end. Well, it was the end. But you can see how easy that would have turned south on you. And it would have been enough water to, make the sea level rise 100 feet or 30 meters overnight. Apparently that's what happened. That's what the records show. Because, where we're looking to find remnants of these civilizations is on dirt. It's not under the sea, because that's where they were living before all this happened. And as we know of 2 megalithic structures that are underneath the sea at around about that depth. One's off Japan, one's off India. And they would have been a great place to live, because we'll always gravitate to the river's edges and the ocean edges to live, because we can fish, and fishing's pretty good. The sea life is a pretty good source of nutrition, and you have a water source, and you have fresh water running into the salt water, so that's pretty good. But climate change on a whole is pretty terrible, and we're seeing the salt table rise as the oceans rise. You may not be in a position to notice the sea level rise, but it's rising. You may not be in a position to have dealt with any sea level rise. I know on my commute there's only about 2 foot of sea level rise, which will cease the trains to go to where I live. At high tide, there is less than 2 feet of difference between the tide height and the railway tracks. And when that occurs, we're going to see the end of that commuting. When that occurs, we see the end of our sanitation plants. We see the end of our sewage treatment plants. We see the end of a majority, by the way, of infrastructure, including roads, and that means food deliveries and transport systems, electrical generation. A whole bunch of things end, and 2 meters above sea level, which is, what's that, 6 foot? Yeah, roughly. Or just a bit more than that. That's a really hard time. Then you start to lose airport infrastructures, and the majority of transport corridors are gone, and housing corridors. So many people live just right around that 2 meter mark. I know that on the coast of California, there's quite a distance, and if you have a 2 meter storm surge or 3 meter storm surge, you might see those houses get washed away, or the foundations being, washed away. But you think about people who are bay side, people who live by a bay, who don't normally get storm surges, who have basically, they could fish from their backyards or their back deck. Those people are going to have the hardest time. And I know people who live on what looks like, just a nice flat area, and they're going to have a real hard time, because at the moment, historically, we've seen the sea level rise a lot already, and it's encroaching upon them on what looks like perfectly flat, but it's got a very slight grade, and that slight grade over like a mile is only like a foot difference, and it's coming up to their back doors. And we've seen the only way that could happen is the sea level rise. It's not that the ground is subsiding, that's being talked about, but the Australian Height Datum, AHD, is proving that it's not the land going down. You can probably find this, but if you Googled it, like something like the Opera House is sinking. And that's what they thought initially when they discovered sea level rise. They thought the Opera House was actually sinking down, and it's not going anywhere. It's on rock. It's not sinking. It's the actual ocean coming up. That's how silly people were thinking. So there is evidence everywhere. All you have to do is go and find it. But don't tell too many people, because they won't believe you. That's the problem I'm having. I looked at the sea level records for Sydney Harbour, and I found that it's gone up and up and up, and it keeps going up and up and up. And every year it goes down a little bit, it goes up more, it goes down a little and up more the next year. And it keeps doing this. And there isn't a stop. I mean, it's not leveling out, it's getting worse. And this estimate that, it's only going to be, 2 millimeters a year or something is ridiculous. It went up 40 mil in 1 year. 40 mil. That's 4 centimeters to everybody else. Well, about an inch and a bit. But you add that up, and that eats away at that 2 foot really quickly. And don't think it won't get bad sooner. And you go, oh no, that means we've got 50 years. Who cares, right? Whatever. That's only 24. It's less than 24 years. It's less than 20 years for 2 feet at the same rate, but it's going up. It's going up at a steeper rate, and that rate is going to give us grief. I got about 2 minutes before the top of the hour. I don't want to make it all terrible. I just want to put it out there that this thing is real. It's real. The climate is heating up. Don't think it's carbon. I think it's the sun more than anything else, or it's the atmosphere thinning, and no one's telling us about that. And there's subsequent issues as a result of that. I've mentioned those. And there's really nothing you and I can do. Keep driving your car. Drive it faster within the speed limit. Don't hurt anyone. Live your life, because this thing needs to be legislated. It needs to be governed. It needs governments to do the things they do, and not people with large beards. If you have a beard, don't hate me. Like the Ned Kelly types, the bushranger types, who are all hipsters we're eating kale and thinking they're changing the planet. It should be really about legislation and changing this and making renewables, at least to get us over the hump. Because once we're on the other side of this and we're no longer doing what we're doing to the planet, maybe that's going to help. Maybe it's going to help. But once you show me that it's carbon causing it, I'll believe you. And I want to see the carbon, not just show me carbon records, but show me the actual evidence showing that carbon actually changes the ground temperature in kilojoules. All right. Anyway, the music's got to have started. I just have to say that out loud. Let me see. There's the music. I'll see you on the other side of a short break. Everyone, enjoy and take the time to donate to Revolution Radio. I believe the audio, the music, the bumpers. I believe the bumpers have now finished. It's Dave from Shiny Side Out. We're back with Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com. That's where we are. Then on the #1 listener supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for only $5. Now in Australia it's $5.95 because of the exchange rate per month, which is just a cup of coffee. Think about it. Can you do that? Can you let go of 1 cup of coffee in a whole month? My goodness. If I do the maths right, and I say, well, I have at least 2 coffees per day, right? That's 60 coffees per month that I'm having, and I could have another one, but I won't. What I'll do is I'll put an automatic payment to Freedom Slips, so I got access to the archives. That's easy. Or, of course, you can do other things. Like you can just simply donate. Just throw money at it, which is good. Sometimes you need to throw money at it. The other thing you can do instead of doing that is simply looking for the gift. You can buy a gift and it gets sent to you. You've donated in exchange for a gift. There are other things, and don't forget Extendivite. And do what Hawk says and mention Nighthawk. And there you go. You've done your bit. You actually have. That's how to do it. Now, if every single person that listened to this donated, or bought gifts in that way, then you would certainly, the station would be thriving. But a lot of you want to listen but not contribute. So Meki and I contribute. We contribute in one way. I also get access to the archives. So I contribute in two ways, I suppose. I'm on air and I'm contributing. And those listeners, albeit, temporary or transient, or you would like to know something today but you found out and you don't need to know anymore, well, there's more hosts on the station that I suggest you listen to. And that way you can do this by getting to the archives. Archives is the easiest way to do it. Anyway, I'll stop harping on about the archives and suggest that if you don't do that, then find another way to support the station. This is show number 354. Pause for Meki. 450 and 300. Love the way he does that. And it's one of those numbers that works really well with it. All right. Now, where were we? Yes, that's right. So Meki can't be with us tonight. He's traveling. And in his travels, from time to time, he'll either be in the air or he'll not have any internet, or the internet is so bad that he can't use it. He can't connect. And when we're lucky, he'll be able to connect with us and have a decent enough signal to run a show. However, this isn't one of those days. He is traveling and he's not anywhere near any internet at all. And you know what? Sometimes I'm envious of being offline. I had a cruise with the family this year and I really loved it. It was fantastic, and it was on the Carnival line. And I have to say, being offline, because I didn't buy the internet, I didn't want the internet while I was there. I wanted to be able to be offline. And the only time that I got it was when we were in Vanuatu, and I used a shop's free Wi-Fi to get some internet just to post a photo. And that was all I did. I didn't look at mail, I didn't look at anything else, just posted a photo and then switched it back off again. And it felt good to be offline. I suppose the future retreats of kids today, when they're old enough to, well, hopefully they're wealthy enough to want to go to a retreat of some kind, and that would be totally offline. Imagine they've got to be in a resort. It's like a Faraday cage and it can't do anything at all. That'd be funny. That would actually be just torture to them currently, but at some point in the future they may want to do it. They may want to be like the olden days. Let's experience life like the 80s, where no one was online. That'd be cool. I'd do that. I'd pay money so I could be offline. And don't tell me and don't laugh in your head. You can just be offline yourself by turning off, putting your phone into flight mode. It's not quite as fun. When it happens outside of your ability to change it, then I think that's where the experience is gained. Anyway, I'll keep moving. So I want to say, in Australia, we have this thing called the NBN. You might have heard me mention it a few times, and it's called the National Broadband Network, and it's pretty cool. I know why it's there. And the ISPs in Australia providing our internet to us were before the internet. So as I connect to my ISP, I can have access to others before I actually go onto the internet. I haven't left the ISP's grasp or network. That's the old way. So if I wanted to message my friend and he was using the same provider, we could do that without talking over the internet. That was bad, apparently, according to the government, because they couldn't see that data transmission. They couldn't see or monitor or do anything with that data. It makes sense, right? However, a new design was put in place where the NBN itself was created out of thin air as a company. It was the one that was going to connect everybody in Australia first, before the internet and before your ISP. So you had to go through the NBN to get to your ISP. See where they moved that layer? They moved it towards the people, stretched it out, created a blobby kind of thing run by the government so they could see every single thing that you ever did, anytime at all, ever on the internet. Then pass your data off. And see, what they kept doing was calling it the data's going dark, was from what I understand the expression they were using. So before the internet came in 96 in Australia, or thereabouts, 95, we were posting letters to each other or using corporate email at the time internally. And all of this was offline to the government. Posting stuff wasn't offline though. Posting or faxing between companies was not offline. That was something that they could see. The government could see it. It went through the PABXs. It went through, the infrastructure, the corporate infrastructure, then through the government-run infrastructure, and then delivered back through the corporate back to some fax machine somewhere. But they could reconstruct that data of that fax and kept a copy, or looked at it at least, and they could read it of what was being transmitted, because it wasn't truly being transmitted directly to it. It was going through a system which could run a copy. So, having said that, this would only occur if the people were on a watch list and there was a warrant and there was this kind of information to back up the need to observe. Now that seems to have gone, because whether or not there's a warrant or not on you, your data is being processed by the government now anyway. I still think it's okay. I don't totally agree with it, but because no one put their hands up and protested against it, it's in now, and there's really nothing we can do. And good for the government for working out a way to get the data lit up again. Instead of it going dark, it's now perfectly alive and they've got access to it. But to what end is the question? So that, we're all safe is the advertised end, or the reason for the motive for doing it. And that's created this. However, because it's government done, they've skimped trying to deploy this. Now, the original design of our Australian network, the NBN, was supposed to be fibre. But the government changed shortly after it was commissioned, and it was all destined to be fibre. So fibre optics means you can get like a gig connection to the internet. Imagine everyone with a gig connection. It'd be awesome, right? But no, not here, not in Australia. Oh no, you can't have that. So the government changed and decided what they were going to do was, because that just seems way too expensive. Wow, what, fibre? What? And they're actually buying back their copper after they'd given you fibre. So they were getting something off it, and there was a rebate anyway on the cost. And honestly, it doesn't cost $10,000 to get a fibre run to your house. It doesn't even cost that much in the actual fibre cable. Most of that's just overhead, management overhead. So just saying, so what did they run instead of fibre? Well, they kept the copper going. So all they have to do is have someone else like an ISP provide the modem, and voila, right? We can give you near fast speeds, near. Like for instance, the fastest speed that you're allowed to buy if you have copper is 100 by 40 megabits per second. That's pretty good. It's not awful. However, you could have gotten gig, and if the technology changed there's 23 separate colors that can run down your fiber line, giving you 23 gig, and that's in both directions, by the way. So just saying, it could have been a lot different. But now, what's been reported right now, because we're coming up to another election, is that, they've actually been deploying copper technology, which is the stuff that the US has already migrated away from. Because I think you can get 400 megabits a second or something like that on copper. Well, we're still struggling at 100, and we can't even get 100. It's just theoretical. And I'm not that far away from the box in the street where my phone line hooks up, and I've got a relatively new phone line. And yet my 80 by 26, despite me buying 40, so 100 by 40, I'm only getting 80 by 26. So it's just a little more than half. I'm still disappointed with that. And the latency's a little unreasonable. And I prefer fiber because the latency is almost none. And being a gig, I'd be the internet. It's like tapping into the main artery of the internet, being fast. And I see that as it's a really cool thing. But you know what? This is the media is now telling us. I think they're slowly dictating which way everyone should be voting in this next election, because the party that decided that we weren't going to get fiber is the one who's still in government. And I think everyone's seen the end of this story and said, well, you know what, let's vote the other people in and we can get fiber back again. Even though the government is saying now they're in a budget surplus, they're not going to do anything about the old and outdated technology that we're currently being deployed to us. It's just rotten. They think that anything, above 28k modem, I'm sort of being facetious here, is fast. If it doesn't take you 45 minutes, if it takes you, it doesn't take you 10 minutes to, I still can't think of this in the right way. The current government using copper thinks that if it takes 2 minutes to see a picture of Catherine Janeway, then it's okay. That's sort of like a mix of different quotes from different shows. So talking about governments, one thing that the Australian government doesn't do, and that is shut down. We don't have these shutdowns. And I just saw the news where there's still a shutdown going on, or it could be extended. And I wanted to know from someone, is the shutdown because the government's basically doing strike action against the government, against itself, in order to get something passed as a legislative bill? Or is it to save that amount of money that they would have spent? Is it unpaid shutdown, is my question. I wonder if someone in the chat room could fill me in. That'd be tremendous. I'd love to see that. Let me know what your thoughts are, because I really want to know, is it just to hardball people into agreeing with a specific idea or thing that they're trying to put up? Like, let's increase the debt ceiling. Everyone says, no, okay, we're going to shut down the government. Good luck with that. Until you say yes. Is that what it is? Is this like hardball? Anyway, I'm going to move on. Still, though, with the US government, and that is that the US has now declared that it's done with ISIS. It's defeated ISIS. Well, for the most part, I think was the paraphrasing. All right, I yet to see the proof. Yeah, you can show me a 5-second slide montage of different imaging from somewhere in the Middle East. We can't identify it specifically and say, yeah, that's there in Syria, or it isn't in Syria. We don't know. And since the leader of Syria never actually mentioned anything about anything in the media. We have really nothing to go on. We only take in the word of the mainstream media. That's it, I'm afraid. So my question was, if the US has said unequivocally that it is now defeated ISIS and pulling its troops out of Syria, where on earth is Turkey getting its information from then by saying that it'll keep fighting ISIS? Turkey says we will keep on fighting ISIS. But hang on, didn't the US just say they defeated ISIS? So where is this extra ISIS coming from? All right, Comet has just commented in the chat room and said, it is a blackmail tactic. Wow, used by both sides. And it does not save money. It costs money because people do not work but still get paid. Ooh, I think that's, but late. They get paid late as well, because there's no one there to process the money, I think, but they still get paid. Wow, blackmail. See, why is the government blackmailing itself? Or is it the other party? Or is it the congressman? Is it? I'm not quite sure. I just think it's rotten, and I don't think anyone should do it. And if you're a private business owner, you shouldn't be doing this at all. Oh, wow. I'm so tired. All right, so next. I'm sure that we've all heard this one, and this was that the drones around Gatwick Airport in England ended up causing a shutdown of the airport because it was unsafe. If you get a drone sucked into a 747 engine, or any jet engine for that matter, it's not going to do the jet engine any favors. And there should be, and I'm sure there is, legislation that prohibits the use of drones within a certain proximity and to a certain altitude ceiling. And Comet agrees with me, saying that it's rotten to the core, this action, and I completely agree. Okay, so, because imagine the government would absolutely detest the workers themselves from protesting in any way, shape or form, and probably cut their pay off. But it seems like the government can shut them down in the same way. What? That's crazy. Anyway, so drones. Under a number of days, a number of drones flown by different people, or the same people, or a group of the same set of people flying the same drones around the airport caused it to shut down a number of times. And you can only imagine the cost. Because if you have, from say, an aviation point of view, right? You're an aviation company, and you fly your plane into Gatwick. You don't just automatically get assigned a gate to pull up to, and it's free. You've got to pay a price per hour to have your plane docked at that gate. Therefore, it costs the company money while it sits there doing nothing, effectively. So if you could imagine a racing car pit stop for a plane. They pull in, it unloads passengers and baggage, resets, unloads also, so empties the sewerage and gets rid of the food waste, restocks the food, refills the liquid required for the sewerage, refuels the plane, given that it requires a certain amount for its next flight based on the amount of passengers and weight. Okay, so we've done that. Then it has to find its slot to take off. All of that builds up a set of time. Then you've got to wait for the flight staff to populate the plane because maybe they're doing a shift change. All of that constitutes to a specific value, and that value is then on-charged on to the aircraft company, not Boeing, but the one that runs it. So this is the problem. So you've got drones flicking around in the air, I'm burning dollars when my plane can't take off. Imagine how costly that is. I'm burning dollars because my staff are on the clock and they're not going anywhere. They're sitting there doing nothing. Imagine the whole staff running the airport. They've done all the processing of everything and they're just frozen, waiting for their next action and can't do anything. There could be a couple of $1 million or more in a large airport. Gatwick's pretty big. So maybe it costs, $200-300 million for a couple of hours downtime across the entire airport. What? So I think your point, flyers of the drones around Gatwick Airport, I think your point is lost in the problem that you caused as a disruption, rather than the prankist nature that I'm suspecting it was done. I know that the persons have been jailed or they're awaiting a hearing based on this, because I think it needs to be put out there, and I think maybe they're just going to be not the scapegoat but the example for this. I think that's what's going to happen, that they're going to be the ones that take the big punishment to stop others from doing it. They should have had drone capturing devices set around the perimeter, or maybe this stunt was all about the sale of those to the airport. Think about that. If it only cost you, $500,000 to set up an airport with this anti-drone tech around it, then you've just saved, the airport hundreds of millions of dollars. That's pretty good. So if you're an entrepreneur out there, go ahead, go do it. Sounds like it's worth doing, and maybe if you ever are delayed because of a drone, you'll have wanted that technology to be in place. Maybe you're asking for it now. Now, the last point that I want to open up, and this is going to go probably for the next half an hour, is if my point is going to be around the global finances. Because I've been watching this for some time now. I've been watching the stocks reduce in value. I've been watching the Dow and all the indices come down by every week. It's like a couple of percent. It seems relatively harmless. But now we've seen a loss of the 2018 profit. That profit from 2018 has now been wiped by these continuous falls. And as the fall of 2% goes down and causes the capital down by 2% and so on, then you're ending up with this kind of weird global vacuuming out, cleaning out, clearing away all of the capital from the Western world. Is it only the West that's being affected? Have a look yourself. You tell me. My thoughts are that there's something behind it. My thoughts are that there's maybe a group. There could be a group that's behind this maybe it's orchestrated. And I was going to say maybe it isn't, maybe it is. Orchestrated collapse of the Western world. Who could survive it? Who could survive if all of the wealth was extracted from the stock market? Like we saw in the 20s. If there was a global depression, if all this invested money disappeared, was vaporized, if there was a run on the banks, if there was... You think about all the companies that could not exist if there wasn't any income. And there's talk that an impending, like, because we're meant to be on a 10-year, the end of a 10-year precipice of gains, and all the others only lasted 10 years. So why would this one last any longer if all the other ones failed after 10 years? Are we looking at the same thing? Are we looking at the end of this? Is this the economic downturn that everyone's been warning us about over the last few years, because we're leading up to the 10-year mark? Don't think that continuous talk of an impending financial collapse is like the coming of Jesus, for instance, where people really don't know when it could be, but surely it's got to be, the signs around now, and maybe this is the time now. No, the talk has been that we're reaching the 10-year mark. We've hit the 10-year mark. It's going to happen, and we're watching it start to happen. It doesn't take much more in a drop in percent for the automated programs to start selling, because the program is set up. If you've ever bought and sold stock, even like pretend stock, you have to, you know, if you want to go up, if you're riding the path up and expect it to become higher in value, then you're going to buy low and sell high. But if you buy low and it starts to drop after you bought it, you're liable for that still. That's the value of the thing you just bought is now dropping out. And you want to try and get out before it drops to zero. So you'll have a little setting in the program, and it'll say, you know, I bought at 100, but if it goes to 90, I'm happy to have a 10% loss of value. And that 10% loss of value would get you 90 cents in the dollar if it was in cents. If it was $1 stock and you sold it at 90 cents each, you'd be lucky, but you only lost however many it is times by 10%, or 10 cents. Great. If you were lucky, that's a loss of 10%. So if you imagine that everyone else wouldn't want to lose any more than 10%, that if the automated selling that everyone had set up just in their mind, right, considered that this was the way to do it properly, only considered a 10% loss as automatic sell of everything you own that had dropped 10%, then we would see automated selling occurring digitally faster than you would be humanly possible to observe. That's the way it would go. So don't forget, you can buy something that's falling, as called a short, and you can still profit on its way to zero. That's something else you can do. But you don't want to buy something now and see it continue to rise, because you're liable for that cost. If they do a call, you've got to pay it. So if you bought something, you can't just, you know, equal bet, buy and sell the same thing at the same time, buy and short. You can't do that. It doesn't end up going favorably for you. So if you short something and it falls, you'll make money. If you buy something and it rises, you make money. If it doesn't do those things that you've predicted, then you lose money. And you lose money at the same rate as you would be gaining it, and it can be disastrous. Truly disastrous. So I'm just saying right now, is this a controlled burn? Are we watching this actually do this now so that everyone with real money is getting out before it drops to zero? Is this what we're seeing? Because I don't know. I'm not an expert. And I'm not going to provide you with financial advice because I'm not a paid financial advisor. I don't know you, and I think you need to do your own research. But every time I look at this, I'm seeing the same thing. I'm seeing what the other people are talking about. When they're talking about it, I'm seeing it through their eyes and I'm seeing their description. So we've interviewed a few people, and I've been following a lot of people, and I don't know. My grandmother, I'll have to tell you, told me a lot about the Depression, that jobs were difficult, mostly government, jobs, and these were infrastructure jobs. The best thing that the government can do during a depression is use cheap labour. Let's put it that way. And by doing that, they're causing, maybe we should call it like a baseline of support to the nation, where they're feeding them just enough so they don't lose all of their people to hunger. You want to use cheap labour if you're the government, and it's a depression where everyone's willing to work for nothing pretty much. Now, at least you're saving people killing each other for food, if there's still an option for this. But the companies that are going to be giving you the job aren't the same company that's going to be giving you the food. And they're not the same company that's giving you the power. They're not the same company that's giving you your water or your sanitation. They're not the same. And if you think that little specialty shop around the corner can last when no one's buying anything from it, yeah, that's not going to happen. So this is the hard part about a depression that they say is coming. And they is the financial people that I look up to, that know what they're talking about. And that it doesn't take much, and it's digital now, and it can happen so much quicker than it did when it happened the last time. And I was talking about my grandmother, and she was talking about just how hard times were, and that you ate very little. And in compared to what we're gluttons today with the amount of food we eat. Honestly, gluttons. Crazy. We eat a crazy amount of food. And I'm not poking at people, suggesting anything other than you'll miss it when it's not there. You'll miss it when you're eating just the carrot skins, for instance. And my grandmother told me about the times in the Depression where they would have a carrot, but they wouldn't skin it because it was just a waste of food. You just washed it and ate it. The potatoes, you left the skins on. We're so opulent now that we cut the skins off. Some people don't. But that's the kind of gluttony that we're in. How much food do you waste at your house? Is there any food that you waste? Because there won't be any food you waste if there's a depression. Now, this moment has been coming since the 80s, and there's a couple of financial charts that I was able to find for the long-term rate predictions. The 30-year rate went to zero back in the 80s. That's when it started its decline. It's almost a linear line, a linear plot. It shows it going to zero. And we've hit that mark, and it happened pretty much on the year they suggested it did. So was the whole thing planned anyway? Was it already something they were going to do? Is this the beginning of the New World Government? Is this the savior of this? Is it a one world currency? Because that's the question I have to ask. How is it remedied? What will they need to put in place to dig us out of this hole? By changing the currency, you can wipe all the debt. Because the debt can't be owed anymore. You think about the defaults that would have to occur the moment no one has any money. Comment just asked me, what, so you're actually supposed to, I'm paraphrasing, you're actually supposed to peel carrots? Well, no, but people find that peeling the carrot itself aids in being able to make them all uniform, because you don't buy them and they're all the same shape and size, but you can whisk them down or whittle them down and create something a little more artistic. And this is what I'm saying with food. We've gotten to the point where we're not just eating food, we're looking at the food. We're not just looking at the food, but we're being particular about the decoration so much of the food. Now, I do respect the Japanese style of food and food preparation and plating. It's unbelievable, the finite textures, how how uniquely vague some of those tastes and textures are on their own, but in comparison, in the dish, when you eat the whole thing by its design, yeah, I get it, but this isn't what I'm talking about. I'm saying the way that the West has turned itself into what looks sort of like Rome in its heyday. We don't throw anyone to any lions. Probably would have kept them alive. They wouldn't be endangered if we'd thrown people to the lions, I suppose. I'm being facetious. Don't throw people to the lions. Persecutions are down, historically. Rome had its groups of people that it persecuted. Firstly the Christians, then it became Christian, then it was doing it to the Jews. Ran out of Jews, then it started doing it to the Jew hierarchy. That can't be good either, and it was a Christmas thing that they were doing it. That's why I only learned about this recently. So that's one thing. Now we've got, food is at all-time opulence. You can buy food from all around the world, even at your local shops, your local supermarket, your local market. You can buy food from all around the world. We're enjoying an experience now where we're all connected to each other. And I could not imagine trying to describe this to people after it was no longer there, to a person who had never experienced it, using only hieroglyphs. Because remember, stone is the only thing that's going to make it to the next set of people. And at some point, you'd want to describe it to someone. This thing we did, not this empire, but this civilization in all of its greatness, with rose-colored glasses, talking about the good times and what we did and how we did it. In hieroglyphs. How would you describe it? It's so misguided, these thoughts, I know. But unfortunately, it's a place that I take myself a lot, is to this fringe thought of how it could be possible that we've gotten to the point that we're now in control of a one world government, that we're now in control of one world currency, that we now have, and I don't think it's going to happen today, that we end up debtless. Robots have taken over our jobs. There's only 500 million left on the planet. All this Agenda 21 stuff. And then, sadly to be smacked by a meteor. And, all of the elite go to the bunkers. This is the kind of stuff we were talking about in 2012, I know. But all of those people go to the bunkers. We all fend for ourselves and turn into like Mad Max on the surface, end up finding their bunkers and await for their return out of the bunkers, if they make it at all. This is the kind of thing. And I can't stop thinking about it. Maybe it's closer than we thought. Maybe there won't be a war, a global conflict. If the global finances can reach zero and the debt is wiped without a war, I'll be extremely pleased. But in the past, as is now, there's a very numerous examples. There are very numerous examples of how that was Mecki would say it's perfectly cromulent. That's a Simpsons quote for poor grammar. Look, I'll restate it. I think we'd be hard pressed to avoid a war and wipe the debt. I think that's the hard part, and because of that, looking into this, it seems as though there's some parallels leading up to World War II that we're doing right now. And if we can, let's try to avoid them at all cost. Let's us try. Now, we don't have very much effect on anything. Maybe voting in one way or the other is a way of doing it, but I think that the politicians, by and large, are controlled by a whole nother suite of individuals. And if anyone at all, if any person at all has any access to that information and feels that they ever need to talk about it, I'd love to hear you, and it would stay off the record unless you ask for it to be on the record. And on the record means that I would say it on air. Because there's two things. I'll give you a hint. When we started this radio program, it was about a year after Revolution Radio began. And the thing that I was most impressed with on this station was the level of intelligence of the people providing the information, the level of intelligence of the people in the round tables, the way that we were able to workshop through ideas and come to outcomes within a show's duration, a single show duration. Really appreciated that. And there's a number of us still here at the station. A number of them have moved on. A number of the people have just gone dark. They've not discussed this any longer. Maybe they've felt like they got out of their system what they needed to. Maybe they felt that their important time right now near what they were talking about was this, end times, which I also mentioned at the party today, was maybe it's their need to be with their families and connect together again with people. Maybe it's they need to build communities. Maybe they saw what they needed and that gap and they identified it, and they've gone and sought a way of fixing it. Because I dare say that if you live in a street and you don't know all your neighbours, then you probably need to get out there and introduce yourself. Kindly, of course, and with an olive branch, metaphorically speaking. I know that we don't all live in neighbourhoods with sane people. I know that we don't all live in neighbourhoods that are safe. But maybe this can turn that around. I remember I lived in one house that was in a street where there was a motorcycle gang member. I don't think it was a clubhouse. I think it was just a member. And that street was pretty safe. Weirdly, though, safe. And I said hello to the guy once when I was walking past that was presumed to be this guy. I don't know if it was exactly the guy, but as long as you make your presence known, that you're there and they know you, and is it who you know? Do you become saved by that? I don't know. Anyway, the short version of that story is that there was very little crime in the street. And was it because they were controlled by them, or they didn't let them in, or people were just afraid because they knew and didn't want to go in that street and rob the wrong house and, ended up a meat popsicle? I don't know. In your community, without doing those bad things, just introducing yourself and saying hello, and beginning the discussion of that community feeling that we all miss from our communities, I think is a very important first step. I was lucky enough to be able to organise a street party for our small street, and we had around about 80%, maybe 90% attendance. There was only a couple of houses that couldn't be there. That was fantastic. Geez, we talked. We had a great evening, and we renewed our friendship with each other, and I think that's really important. So, of all the people who attended, I would eat none of them if the what was that first against the wall when the revolution came. I would eat none of them. They're all the advocates for it. Those people who didn't attend, I know why some of those people didn't attend. I know why some of them weren't available for it, and that's fine too. When I first moved in, there was probably a couple of people on the list, and jokingly, that I would eat first when the revolution came, because they didn't want to participate in anything or do anything. They wouldn't be part of the community. And if you were subsistence farming and those people did nothing at all, refused to help, but still wanted part of it, would you help? Would you do that? If they were able-bodied, but just not able-minded enough to want to participate, but still wanted to profit from it, you'd probably end up saying no and pushing them on. Because the way that you're going to win as a community is not just helping those infirm and the people who can't make it, because that's the way you keep a society together, but it's to encourage everyone to participate. So, and you can participate in ways that maybe you don't know how initially. Yeah, you might just be moral support for everyone. You might be an educator. You don't have to be a hunter-gatherer or a farmer to participate. You might be like a child carer. You might be someone who thatches roofs. You might be, because there's a name from the past, Thatcher. You might be, you might be the one who builds the first furnace and starts metallurgy after the revolution comes. So think about it. Think about how you might best communicate to the next group of people. That's your homework for the week. Hopefully, Mackie's going to be on board for the next show. Let me just check, because I think this is the 23rd today, which is started off your 22nd. Then the next one's the 30th. All right. So I know we're probably both available for next week too. So that's good. Wherever you are listening to this, and even if it's in arrears and you listen to this and you haven't skipped too far through, because you're probably not going to be truly attuned to everything that I'm thinking of. But if you're in a position on the planet that celebrates Christmas, then Merry Christmas to you. If you're in a position on the globe somewhere that you celebrate Hanukkah, then my wishes are with you. Well done. If it's Festivus from Seinfeld, then Merry Festivus to you, or Happy Festivus. If you're anywhere else and you don't like any of those things and prefer Happy Holidays, then I say Happy Holidays to all of you, generally. If you're in any religion that I haven't named, I apologize. And I wish you and your family good tidings and well wishes through the same period. Certainly until next week and on into 2019, if I don't get to be on air next week. Wow, that sounded like something just popped into the show. Definitely sounds like I've got a producer on the air. Oh, anyway, it could be a 3-letter agency. Welcome to you. If you're here, I've been promoting good, happy stuff today. All right, no dramas. Jebez just sent me a message for his show coming up. I'll stick around, buddy. Don't you worry about that. I've got your back. All right. Now, so your homework for the week is to don't forget to build those communities wherever you are. I would even include research what it is that you can grow in the area you live in the seasons that you live in, with the types of food that would grow at your altitude and soil type and seasonally. Also, not only that, but check out to see if you can supply me with any of that just carbon details that I was speaking about at the top of the hour. And also, don't feel free to message either Mackie and I at any time. We have via the website that you can email us at dave@shinysideout or Mackie@shinysideout.net.au, I think. We couldn't get .com because someone bought it, and they bought it on me. So I was registering the other one. They bought that one straight away, and they didn't buy it. They bought it within minutes of me buying the other one. So someone knew. There's someone savvy enough to be able to buy a website from out from under you. Yeah. Also, think about that alien connection with God and aliens, and is there still room for God in your life if you already had God there, but then discovered aliens created humans? How would that make you feel? And do you think there's still room? Feel free to message me. Find me on Facebook. Find Shiny Side Out on Facebook. Message me there or email us via the website. I'm happy to communicate with anyone. If this is on YouTube, then feel free to comment below what your thoughts are.